The pen hovered just a breath above the paper. Across the marble table, Donald Kyle's hand shook so badly the ink trembled in the signature line. Like his body already knew this was the moment his entire life would collapse. His suit was perfect. Charcoal gray, Italian wool, tailored to precision. But his face wasn't. Sweat gathered at his temple, sliding down past graying sideburns. His throat worked like he was swallowing stones. His eyes, red-rimmed from weeks without real sleep, stared at the document like it was a death sentence. Because it was. Wait, before we continue, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What city? What country? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far these stories reach across the world. And listen, if you're the kind of person who loves powerful real-life stories about courage, redemption, and the moments that change everything, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next in Donald's story, you absolutely won't want to miss it. Seriously, this gets intense. Around him, 5 lawyers sat stiff and silent in their tailored suits. Leather portfolios spread across the table like weapons waiting to be deployed. Their eyes were fixed on the settlement agreement as if it were a coffin lid, waiting to be closed. The air in the private dining room felt thick, suffocating. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Beverly Hills sparkled in the afternoon sun. Palm trees swaying gently, luxury cars gliding down Rodeo Drive, life moving forward while his was ending. At the head of the table sat Marcus Blackwell, silver hair perfectly styled, Rolex catching the light, a man who looked like he'd never lost anything in his life. His voice was smooth as aged whiskey when he spoke. Sign page 47, Mr. Kyle. He tapped the line with one manicured finger. Initial pages 12, 23, and 31. Once this is filed with the court, the criminal charges will be reduced to corporate negligence. You'll pay the fine, surrender your assets, and walk away with your freedom. It's the best deal you're going to get. The best deal. Donald's vision blurred as he stared at the number. $340 million. The settlement that would dissolve Kyle Pharmaceuticals, the company his father had built from absolutely nothing 40 years ago. Started in a garage. Grew through sleepless nights and unshakable determination. Now a Fortune 500 company employing thousands. Gone. All of it gone. The charges were damning. Falsified clinical trial data. Fraudulent safety reports. Conspiracy to distribute unapproved medications. The FDA investigation had been brutal, methodical, merciless. The Cardexatrol trials from 2016 to 2018, heart medication that was supposed to save lives but was rushed to market on fabricated data. The evidence seemed ironclad, unbeatable, damning. Donald was 53 years old, and everything was slipping through his fingers like sand. The company, his reputation, his father's legacy, the homes, the estate in Malibu, the penthouse in Manhattan, the villa in Tuscany, the art collection his mother had spent decades curating, his investment portfolio. Every asset he'd ever built would be liquidated to pay the settlement. He'd be left with nothing but a modest trust fund and the crushing weight of public disgrace. His father's face flashed in his mind. The man who'd raised him to never quit, never surrender, never let anyone tell you you're defeated. What would he think seeing his son about to sign away everything he'd built? But what choice did he have? Blackwell had made it clear. Sign or face full criminal prosecution. Prison time. A trial that would destroy what little remained of the Kyle name. This was mercy, they said. This was his only way out. Donald's fingers closed around the pen. His hand moved toward the paper. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, barely audible, so quiet it almost didn't register, someone spoke. Sir, please don't sign that. The voice came from behind him, soft but urgent, trembling but certain. Donald froze. His hand stopped mid-air, pen hovering over the signature line. He turned slowly, Standing at the edge of the room was a young black woman in the restaurant's standard server uniform. Crisp white shirt, black vest, name tag pinned just above her heart. It read, Darby. She held a silver coffee pot in one hand, the other gripping a serving tray so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Her eyes weren't on the lawyers or Blackwell or even Donald. They were locked on the document, on the papers that were about to destroy everything. The room froze. The lawyers stopped breathing. Blackwell's fingers went still on the table. Even the air seemed to crystallize in that moment, like time itself was waiting to see what happened next. Blackwell's head turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury. Excuse me? His tone could have cut glass. This is a private meeting. You need to leave. Now. But the waitress Darby didn't move. Her hands were shaking. Donald could see the tremor running through her fingers, the rapid rise and fall of her chest. She was terrified, absolutely terrified, but she didn't leave. The liability transfer, she said, her voice growing stronger despite the fear. Section 9, subsection C. The indemnification clause. She took a step closer, eyes still fixed on the document. It's wrong. One of the junior attorneys, a woman in a sharp gray suit, stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. Security needs to remove this woman immediately. Ma'am, you need to leave, another lawyer said, already moving toward her, hand reaching for her arm. But Donald held up his hand. Wait. The word came out rougher than he intended. Everyone stopped. The junior attorney's hand froze mid-reach. Blackwell's jaw tightened visibly. Donald stared at Darby, really looked at her for the first time. She was young, mid-20s probably. Exhaustion marked her face, the kind that comes from working multiple jobs, from carrying weight no one else can see. But her eyes, there was something in her eyes, an absolute certainty, a conviction that cut through all the expensive suits and legal expertise in the room. Something in her voice made his heart pound. What did you say? Donald asked quietly. Darby's hands were still shaking as she stepped closer to the table. The lawyers bristled, but Donald's raised hand kept them frozen in place. The document, Darby said, her voice steadier now. You're signing that you accept full personal liability for all corporate actions dating back 15 years. She pointed to a specific paragraph, her finger not quite touching the paper. But according to California corporate law, if you weren't CEO or majority shareholder during certain periods, you can't be held personally liable for decisions made before you assumed control. Blackwell laughed. It was sharp, harsh, dismissive. Mr. Kyle, this woman is serving coffee. She has no legal expertise whatsoever. Don't insult our intelligence or yours by entertaining this interruption. But Donald wasn't looking at Blackwell anymore. He was looking at Darby. And then he was looking at the document. At Section 9, subsection C. At the clause he'd been about to sign without question. When did you become CEO? Darby asked, ignoring Blackwell entirely, her eyes locked on Donald's. Donald's mind raced backward through years of board meetings, corporate restructuring, his father's declining health. June 2019, he said slowly. My father was CEO until his stroke. Before that, I was CFO. And the falsified trials they're charging you for, Darby pressed. The Cardexatrol trials? When were those conducted? The room was so quiet Donald could hear his own heartbeat. 2016 through 2018, he whispered. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then Darby nodded, just once. Then you weren't CEO. You weren't even on the board of directors until 2017. She glanced at the papers in her hand, the serving tray she'd been carrying. I saw it in the corporate filings. They were printed on the backs of old menus in the service station. Your staff was using old investor reports as scrap paper. The room erupted. This is absurd. Blackwell slammed his hand on the marble table, making the pens jump. Mr. Kyle, Sign the document now, or we withdraw the offer and you face the full criminal prosecution. Every second you delay. Is she right? Donald's voice cut through Blackwell's tirade like a knife. The silver-haired lawyer stopped mid-sentence. Is she right? Donald stood up, his chair scraping back. If I wasn't CEO during those trials, if I wasn't even on the board when those decisions were made, then how can I be personally liable for them? The silence that followed was deafening. One of the junior attorneys, the young woman who'd tried to call security, opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. Blackwell, she said hesitantly, corporate officers aren't retroactively liable for actions predating their tenure unless they're found to have participated in or ratified those actions. Enough. Blackwell's composure cracked like ice. Mr. Kyle, every minute you delay costs you leverage. The prosecution is offering mercy. Don't throw it away because a waitress read some Wikipedia articles about. How do you know about corporate liability law? Donald asked Darby, his voice quiet but intense. Darby's eyes glistened. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, or run, or both. Then she spoke. I was 2 semesters from finishing my JD at UCLA, she said quietly. My mother got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I dropped out to take care of her and pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. She died 6 months ago. I've been working 3 jobs trying to pay off the medical debt. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Donald turned slowly to face Blackwell. The silver-haired lawyer's face had gone pale. You told me I had no choice, Donald said, his voice dangerously quiet. You said the evidence was overwhelming. You said this settlement was my only way to avoid prison. He stepped closer. But if I wasn't legally responsible for decisions made before I was CEO, then half these charges shouldn't even exist. Blackwell's jaw worked, but no words came out. Answer me, Marcus. Donald's voice rose. Is she right? The timeline is. Blackwell's voice was strained. The corporate structure during that period is complex. That's not an answer. And in that moment, Donald Kyle realized something that made his blood run cold. His lawyer, the man he'd trusted with everything, the man who was supposed to protect him, had been lying to him. The question was, why? What did this waitress see that 5 lawyers missed? Or worse, what did 5 lawyers see and deliberately hide? Donald's question hung in the air like a blade suspended over Blackwell's neck. Is she right? The head lawyer's face had gone from pale to flushed, a crimson creeping up from his collar. His fingers drummed once against the table, a nervous tell Donald had never seen from him before. Marcus Blackwell never showed nerves. He was the man you called when everything was falling apart, the fixer, the closer, the one who made problems disappear. But right now, he looked like a man watching his own carefully constructed world begin to crack. Mr. Kyle, Blackwell said, his voice regaining some of its professional smoothness. The legal complexities of corporate liability span multiple jurisdictions and, yes or no, Marcus? The room was so quiet Donald could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant clink of silverware from the main dining room, the pounding of his own heart. Blackwell's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. It is that simple. Donald took a step toward the table, his shadow falling across the unsigned document. Either California law allows you to hold me personally liable for decisions made before I was CEO, or it doesn't. Which is it? One of the junior attorneys, a young man with horn-rimmed glasses who hadn't spoken once during the entire meeting, cleared his throat softly. Technically, in California, corporate officers are only liable for actions during their tenure unless there's evidence they participated in or ratified those actions afterward. The words landed like bombs in the quiet room. Blackwell shot the young attorney a look that could have melted steel. What Michael is trying to say, what Michael is saying, Donald interrupted, is that Darby is right. He turned to face her fully for the first time. She still stood near the wall, coffee pot clutched in her hands like a shield, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. But her eyes, those intelligent, exhausted eyes, held steady. "You saw the corporate filings," Donald said, more statement than question. "On scrap paper in the service station." Darby nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your staff was using old investor reports as placemats under coffee supplies. I saw the dates. The board composition from 2016 to 2018. Your name wasn't listed as CEO until 2019. And you remember all that? From placemats." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, sad and weary. "Photographic memory. It was one of the reasons I got into UCLA law in the first place. I can see a page once and recall it." She swallowed hard. "It's not always useful when you're carrying coffee for a living, but today it is," Donald finished. The female junior attorney, the one who'd called for security, stepped forward, her professional mask slipping. "Mr. Blackwell, if she's correct about the timeline, then we need to review the liability structure of this entire settlement. The indemnification clause on page 47 would make Mr. Kyle personally responsible for corporate actions that legally—" "I know what it would do, Susan," Blackwell snapped, his smooth demeanor shattering completely. "What I need is for everyone in this room to remember that we have a very limited window to accept this settlement offer. The prosecution isn't going to wait while we—" "The prosecution?" Donald said slowly, the pieces clicking together in his mind like a puzzle he should have solved weeks ago. "Isn't the one who's in a hurry, is it Marcus?" Blackwell went very still. "You are." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the silence of shock or confusion. This was the silence of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud, hovering in the air between them, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to grab it. Donald's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "When did you become CEO, Marcus?" he asked quietly, echoing Darby's question. Blackwell's face darkened. "I don't know what you're implying. When did I become CEO?" "June 2019, Blackwell said through gritted teeth. "After my father's stroke. After he was already incapacitated." Donald's voice was rising now, control slipping as the fury built. "I was CFO before that. I wasn't making decisions about clinical trials. I wasn't approving safety data. I wasn't even in the meetings where those decisions were made." He moved around the table, getting closer to Blackwell with each word. "So why?" Donald said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and cold. "Am I signing a document that says I'm personally liable for crimes that happened before I even had the authority to commit them?" Blackwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "Because corporate liability is complex, Donald. Because the prosecution has built a case that—" "Then unbuild it." Donald slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "You're supposed to be my lawyer, Marcus. You're supposed to defend me, not hand me over gift-wrapped to people who want to destroy me. I am defending you. This settlement protects you from—" "From what?" Donald's voice cracked. "From the truth? From a fair trial? Or from something else entirely?" The question hung between them like an accusation. Blackwell's face had gone from red to white, his composure completely shattered now. For the first time in the weeks since the FDA investigation began, Donald saw real emotion cross his lawyer's face. "Fear." "Mr. Kyle," Blackwell said carefully, "I strongly advise you to sign this document before—" "Before what?" Donald stepped closer. "Before I start asking the right questions? Before I realize you've been lying to me this entire time?" "I have never lied." "Then answer me." Donald's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. "How much are they paying you?" The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Blackwell's face went blank. "Excuse me?" "The prosecution, the FDA, whoever is on the other side of this settlement." Donald's voice was shaking now, but not from fear. from rage, from the dawning realization of just how badly he'd been betrayed. How much are they paying you to deliver my surrender? That is an outrageous accusation. Then deny it. I don't have to deny. Deny it, Donald roared. The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the room seemed frozen, waiting. Even Darby, still pressed against the wall with her coffee pot, had gone completely still. Blackwell's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But no denial came. And in that silence, Donald Kyle understood something that made his entire body go cold. This wasn't just negligence. This wasn't just bad legal advice. This was deliberate. His own lawyer, the man he'd trusted with everything, the man who was supposed to protect him from destruction, had been working to ensure that destruction from the very beginning. Get out, Donald said quietly. Blackwell blinked. What? Get out of this room. Get out of my sight. Get out of my life. Donald's voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. You're fired. All of you. Every single lawyer in this room who knew about this and said nothing. Fired. Mr. Kyle, you're making a terrible mistake. No, Marcus. Donald's voice was ice now. The terrible mistake was trusting you. He turned to the junior attorneys, the ones who'd sat silent through the meeting, the ones who'd watched this unfold with growing discomfort. If any of you knew about the liability issue and said nothing, get out now. If you had questions about this settlement and were told to keep quiet, you have 5 seconds to tell me. The young man with horn-rimmed glasses, Michael, raised his hand slowly. I flagged the timeline issue 3 weeks ago. Mr. Blackwell told me it had been addressed. Susan, the female attorney, spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. He told me the prosecution had evidence of post-tenure ratification, that you'd approved reports after becoming CEO that referenced the earlier trials. Did you see that evidence? Donald asked. She shook her head. He said it was privileged. Donald turned back to Blackwell, who now looked like a man watching his career implode in real time. Privileged, of course. He grabbed his phone from the table, fingers moving fast. Nancy? It's Donald. Listen carefully. I need you to pull every board meeting record from 2016 to 2019. Every email chain I was copied on. Every memo with my signature. Everything. I want proof of what I knew and when I knew it. He paused, listening to his assistant's confused questions. Because, Donald said, his eyes locked on Blackwell's, I'm about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes, and I need documentation for what's coming next. He hung up and turned to Darby, who still stood frozen against the wall, looking like she regretted ever speaking up. Stay, Donald said to her. Please, I need you here. Mr. Kyle, this is highly inappropriate. Blackwell started. You know what's inappropriate? Donald cut him off. Almost signing away my entire life because I trusted the wrong people. Almost sacrificing everything my father built because I believed you when you said I had no choice. He stepped closer to Blackwell, voice dropping to something dangerous. Tell me something, Marcus. When the prosecution came to you with their case, when they showed you the timeline, when they showed you the evidence, did you see the same thing Darby saw? Did you notice that I wasn't even CEO during the fraud? Blackwell's silence was answer enough. You did, Donald whispered. You saw it, and you said nothing. Why? This is absurd. I don't have to answer. Fine. Don't answer me. Answer the state bar when I file my complaint. Answer the judge when I bring you up on legal malpractice charges. Answer the media when they ask why you tried to make me sign away rights I legally had. Donald's voice rose with each sentence. And answer yourself when you look in the mirror tonight and realize you almost destroyed an innocent man for. What? Money? A favor? What was worth it, Marcus? Blackwell's face had gone sheet white. For a long moment he just stood there, seeming to age 10 years in the space of seconds. Then, without another word, He grabbed his briefcase from the table and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Donald with something that might have been regret, or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell. "You have no idea what you're doing," Blackwell said quietly. "No idea what you've just started. Then explain it to me." But Blackwell just shook his head and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded, in the quiet room, like a gunshot. The remaining lawyers looked at each other nervously. Michael, the young attorney with the glasses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Kyle, if you're firing the legal team, you should know that without representation." "I have representation," Donald said, already dialing another number on his phone. "The representation I should have called from the beginning." He put the phone to his ear, waiting for the connection. On the third ring, a woman's voice answered. "Jennifer Chow." "Jenny, it's Donald Kyle. I need you. Now." A pause. "Donald? I thought Marcus Blackwell was handling." "He was. He's not anymore." Donald's voice was grim. "Something's very wrong with my case, Jenny. Something I should have caught weeks ago, but I was too scared to question. Can you get to Chateau Elon in the next hour? I can be there in 30 minutes. Should I bring everything you have on FDA corporate liability cases. Bring your prosecution contacts. And Jenny," he glanced at Darby, still standing there with her coffee pot, looking like she'd walked into something far bigger than she'd expected. "Bring an open mind, because the next few hours are going to get very strange." He hung up and looked around the room, at the junior attorneys packing their folders, at the unsigned settlement agreement still sitting on the table, at the pen he'd been about to use to sign away everything. Then he looked at Darby. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You know that, right? In about 30 seconds I would have signed that document. Everything would have been over. And I never would have known that I gave it all away for nothing." Darby's hands were still shaking. "I almost didn't say anything. I almost walked away." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the document that had almost destroyed him. "Because," she said finally, "my mother spent the last 6 months of her life fighting a system that didn't care about her, fighting insurance companies who denied her treatment, fighting hospitals who saw her as a liability instead of a person who needed help." Her voice cracked. "She died because people who should have helped her looked the other way. And I promised myself at her funeral that if I ever saw someone being destroyed by people who were supposed to protect them," she looked up at Donald, tears in her eyes now, "I wouldn't look the other way. Not ever again." The silence that followed her words felt sacred somehow, like the space between a question and an answer, between destruction and salvation. Donald nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of you. She would have told me to mind my own business and keep my job," Darby said with a sad smile. "She was practical like that." "Then it's a good thing you didn't listen." Darby laughed, a short, shocked sound. "I never do. It got me in trouble all through law school. My professor said I asked too many questions, challenged too many assumptions." "That's not a flaw," Donald said. "That's exactly what makes a good lawyer." She shook her head. "Not when you can't afford to finish your degree. Not when you're working 3 jobs just to pay off medical debt and keep a roof over your head. Being right doesn't pay bills, Mr. Kyle." "Donald," he corrected. "And you're right. Being right doesn't pay bills." He gestured to the chair nearest him. "But preventing wrongful bankruptcy does. Sit down, Darby. Please. My real lawyer is going to be here in 20 minutes. And when she gets here, I'm going to need you to tell her everything you saw on those investor reports. Every detail you can remember." Darby hesitated, looking at the empty chairs where 5 lawyers had sat just minutes ago. "Mr. Kyle, Donald, I don't think that's exactly what Blackwell wanted me to do," Donald interrupted gently. "Not think. Just trust. Just sign. Just accept that the people in suits with fancy degrees knew better than I did." He met her eyes. "But you thought You questioned. And it saved me. So please, sit down. Because whatever we're about to uncover in the next few hours, whatever Blackwell was really trying to hide, I have a feeling I'm going to need the person who actually notices what's wrong. Slowly, carefully, Darby set down her coffee pot on the serving cart. She smoothed her server's vest with trembling hands and walked to the table. She sat down in the chair directly across from where Blackwell had been sitting, looking small and out of place among the leather portfolios and abandoned legal documents. But when she looked up at Donald, her eyes were clear. Section 9, subsection C, she said quietly. That's where it starts. But I don't think that's where it ends. What do you mean? She reached across the table, carefully pulling the settlement document toward her. Her finger traced down the pages, eyes scanning the dense legal language with practiced ease. Here, and here, and... She flipped to another page. Here. These clauses, they're not standard. I've read dozens of settlement agreements for class work, and these provisions. She looked up at Donald. Someone wrote this specifically to trap you. This isn't a template. This is custom-built. A chill ran down Donald's spine. How can you tell? Because normal settlements protect both parties. They're carefully balanced. But this, she tapped the document. This only protects one side. And it's not yours. Michael, the young attorney, stepped closer, looking over her shoulder. She's right, he breathed. Oh my God, she's right. Look at Clause 17. That's not a standard indemnification, that's a complete transfer of liability. And here, in Clause 22, they didn't just want your assets. They wanted the rights to pursue your father's estate too. My father's estate? Donald felt the ground shift beneath him again. My father died 2 years ago. His estate was settled. How could they? They couldn't, Susan said, moving to look at the document too. Unless you personally accepted liability for corporate actions that predated your tenure and also implicated prior leadership. Then the settlement could be used to. She trailed off, face going pale. To reopen the estate. To go after assets that were already distributed. The room went very quiet. Donald sank into his chair, the magnitude of what had almost happened crashing over him like a wave. They weren't just trying to destroy me. They were trying to destroy everything my father built. His entire legacy. They wanted to claw back money that had already been given to charities, to family, to erase him, Darby finished quietly. Completely. Donald looked at her. This woman in a server's uniform who'd seen what 5 lawyers had either missed or deliberately hidden. Who would do this? And why? I don't know, Darby said. But whoever wrote this settlement knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't incompetence. This is... She searched for the word. This is warfare. The door opened, and a striking Asian woman in her 40s strode in, briefcase in hand, heels clicking on the marble floor. Jennifer Chow's sharp eyes took in the scene. The abandoned lawyers' portfolios, the unsigned document, Darby in her server uniform sitting at the table. Donald, she said, her voice brisk and professional. You said something was wrong. Start talking. Donald gestured to Darby. Meet the woman who just saved my life, and possibly uncovered the biggest legal conspiracy I've ever seen. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. She looked at Darby, then at the document on the table, then back at Donald. You have 10 minutes to bring me up to speed, and then we're going to war. Donald smiled grimly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. But as he began explaining everything that had happened, Darby's interruption, the timeline discrepancy, Blackwell's betrayal. One question kept echoing in his mind. Blackwell's last words before he left. Asterisk. You have no idea what you've just started. Asterisk. What had they started? And more importantly, who was waiting on the other side? Jennifer Chow worked fast. Within an hour, she'd pulled Donald's complete corporate history. Every board meeting, every email, every document from 2016 forward. You weren't just uninvolved, Jennifer said, spreading files across Donald's dining table. You actively opposed the Cardexatrol trials. Look, here's an email from March 2017 where you questioned the accelerated timeline. You called it reckless. Donald stared at the email he'd written years ago, words he'd forgotten. My father overruled me. He said the company needed a win after 2 failed drug launches. Your father, Jennifer said quietly, approved every fraudulent report, and Blackwell knew it. The room went silent. Darby, sitting across from them, spoke softly. That's why he wanted you to sign so badly. If the full investigation continued, they'd uncover your father's role. The criminal liability would extend to his estate, to everything he left behind. But I'm his heir, Donald whispered. If they went after the estate, they'd take everything anyway, Jennifer finished. But this way it would look like justice, like you were paying for crimes you actually committed. No one would question it. Michael, who'd stayed after Donald invited him, leaned forward. So Blackwell wasn't working for the prosecution. He was working for someone who wanted the Kyle family completely destroyed. Who would want that? Jennifer's phone buzzed. She read the message and her face went pale. I just got the list of Blackwell's previous cases. 6 pharmaceutical executives in 3 years. All FDA settlements. All signed similar documents. She looked up. 4 of them lost everything. The other 2 are in prison. Dear God, Donald breathed. How many people has he destroyed? That's not even the worst part, Jennifer said. The FDA investigator on your case, Michael Torres, was his law school roommate. They've been running this scheme together for years. Target executives with complicated corporate structures. Offer settlements that seem merciful but actually strip away rights they legally have. Collect fees from both sides. Donald felt sick. So what do? We go public, Jennifer said. Tomorrow morning. Full press conference. Release everything. The timeline proving your innocence. The fraudulent settlement. Blackwell's conspiracy. We blow this wide open. But my father, Donald said quietly. If we release everything, the truth about what he did, will come out anyway, Jennifer said gently. The question is, do you want to control the narrative, or let them? Donald looked at Darby, who'd been silent through most of the conversation. What do you think? I think, Darby said carefully, that the truth is the only foundation worth building on, even when it hurts. The press conference detonated across every news network. Donald didn't just expose Blackwell, he exposed everything. His father's fraud, his own inheritance of a tainted legacy, the conspiracy that had destroyed for other executives. But he also announced something else. A $400 million victim compensation fund, funded by liquidating his father's estate. Every patient harmed by Cardexatrol would be made whole. Every executive Blackwell had destroyed would get justice. Within days, federal investigators arrested Marcus Blackwell and Michael Torres. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone imagined. Bribes, kickbacks, a network of corrupt officials spanning multiple agencies. Donald Kyle was exonerated completely, but the exoneration came at a cost. The company survived, barely. His personal wealth was decimated. The Kyle name, once synonymous with pharmaceutical excellence, became a cautionary tale. And through it all, Darby was there. True to his word, Donald had made her general counsel. She finished her JD through an accelerated program, passed the bar on her first attempt, and became the moral compass of the rebuilt company. Within 6 months, she'd restructured the entire compliance department. Within a year, Kyle Pharmaceuticals had become an industry model for transparency. Donald sat in his smaller office. The Malibu estate was gone, sold to fund the compensation. Staring at a folder Darby had just placed on his desk. The final audit, she said quietly. Everything about your father's tenure. Every decision, every trial. Donald's hands shook as he opened it. The evidence was damning. His father hadn't just approved one fraudulent trial, he'd orchestrated 3. Safety data falsified, adverse events hidden, all to push drugs to market faster. He knew, Donald whispered. From the beginning. Yes, Darby said. She sat down across from him. You could bury this. Attorney-client privilege. No one has to know. Donald thought about that night at Chateau Elon. The moment Darby had said, "Sir, please don't sign that." The moment everything changed because someone was brave enough to tell him the truth. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. "Tell the truth," Darby said without hesitation. "All of it, because hiding it makes you complicit. And you're not your father, Donald. You don't have to protect his lies." 3 days later, Donald held another press conference. This one was smaller, quieter, but the impact was seismic. He released the full audit, established an additional compensation fund from what remained of his inheritance, announced federal oversight of Kyle Pharmaceuticals for the next 5 years. He didn't excuse his father, didn't minimize the harm, just told the truth. The media firestorm was brutal, but when Donald looked in the mirror that night, for the first time in 2 years, he could meet his own eyes. Donald sat in his modest office, watching Darby accept the California Lawyer of the Year award on his laptop. In her speech, she told the story of that day at Chateau Elon. "I almost didn't speak up," she said to the crowd. "I was terrified. I was nobody. But I realized something. Sometimes the people with the most at stake see the clearest. Because we can't afford not to." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "And sometimes the people with everything to lose make the bravest choice of all. Not in refusing to fall, but in choosing how to rise afterward." Donald closed his laptop and smiled. He'd lost almost everything, the estate, the fortune, the empire his father built. But he'd gained something more valuable. Integrity. The ability to look at himself without flinching. The knowledge that when faced with the choice between comfortable lies and difficult truth, he'd chosen truth. Kyle Pharmaceuticals was smaller now, leaner, but it was honest. Every drug properly tested, every trial transparent, every employee knowing that speaking up wouldn't cost them their job, it would be celebrated. And it all started because a waitress working 3 jobs to pay off medical debt had the courage to say 4 words, "Sir, please don't sign that." 6 months after the award ceremony, Donald walked into Chateau Elon for the first time since that fateful day. The maitre d' recognized him, tension flashing across his face. "Mr. Kyle, we didn't expect." "I have a reservation," Donald said. "Table for 2. They were led to the same private dining room. Donald sat down at the same table, looking at the spot where he'd almost signed away everything. Darby walked in, no longer in a server's uniform but in a tailored suit, briefcase in hand. She'd just come from deposing a pharmaceutical executive in a case that would reshape industry regulations. "You're buying me lunch at the place I used to serve coffee?" she said with a smile. "Seemed appropriate," Donald said. "Besides, I wanted to say thank you. Again. For the 1,000th time." "You don't have to keep thanking me, Donald." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do. Because you didn't just save my company. You saved me. You showed me that losing everything can be the only way to find yourself." They ordered. They talked. They laughed. Outside the windows, Beverly Hills sparkled in the afternoon sun, life moving forward. And in that dining room where everything had almost ended, Donald Kyle realized something profound. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from power or prestige or expensive lawyers in tailored suits. Sometimes it comes from someone brave enough to speak truth to power, and wise enough to listen when they do. The pen that almost destroyed him never touched the paper. And the life that emerged from the ashes was more honest, more meaningful, and more valuable than the empire that almost fell. Because in the end, Donald Kyle learned the most important lesson of all. It's not what you build that defines you. It's what you're willing to sacrifice to build it right. You know what gets me about this story? It's not just that a millionaire almost lost everything. It's that the person who saved him was someone nobody in that room valued. Someone working 3 jobs to survive. Someone everyone had been trained to overlook. How many brilliant minds are out there right now, buried under survival? How many people see the truth but stay silent because they think nobody will listen? Darby spoke up, and it saved a life. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your voice matters even when you feel powerless, show me by hitting that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss these stories. Because every week, I bring you real accounts of courage, justice, and the human spirit refusing to break. And please leave a comment. Tell me about a time you spoke up when everyone told you to stay quiet, or a time you wish you had. Let's build a community of people who refuse to look away. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Darby's story and Donald's story. I'll see you next time. Stay strong.